Hey thinkers, it's me, your girl, Elena Grace, and I'm here today to drop you guys some sick beats. Not really, I don't know why I decided to say that, but also kind of because there's a lot going on today, okay? So bear with me. First of all, I have something to tell you guys. Actually, I have two things to tell you guys. Okay, Elena, get it together. First, we have new intro music. Okay. I am so excited. The intro music that has been on all of the previous episodes is going to stay there. So if you like the boom, 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 you know, I can't even do it right now. Anyway, if you like that, it's going to stay on those episodes. I'm not going to go back and replace all of that. I really don't have the time nor patience nor ability to do that. However, for all episodes forthcoming, I have had a new intro song mixed for us, and it's a vibe. Adam says it's, quote, groovy, and that's really what we want, right? So I am very excited for that to debut it today with this really incredible episode. So today I have an old college friend, Dakota Porter. She is incredible. I say friend like that because we talk about this a little bit, I think, in the episode. We really weren't friends in college. We weren't enemies or anything, but we just weren't friends. But we always kind of had a girl crush on each other from afar. Like, so much admiration for each other and everything that we were both doing individually in our respective sororities and organizations on campus and in our programs. So, and we had really close mutual friends too. So it's so weird to me still that we were never good friends in college. But now we are. We have bonded over our mutual love for each other. And for Westies, her moms have Westies, and they are almost as cute as Winnie. No, they're really freaking cute. They're really freaking cute. And yeah, so we've bonded over that. But anyway, this episode is really wonderful. It is really talking about the intersection of climate change and women's rights. And you would not think that those two things are related, right? It's hard to imagine that, but Dakota really goes into how those two things are innately related, especially in today's day and age. And we have a really incredible discussion. She is really knowledgeable on this subject, and she talks more about her credentials and kind of how she came to be very knowledgeable on this. And it is just a really wonderful educational episode, and I'm so glad to get to be able to share it because it's fascinating and it is very poignant and very important at this very moment in time. Like, this is a now thing that we have to worry about. It's something we should have been worrying about a long time ago, honestly. Yeah, so I'm excited for you guys to enjoy it. However, I do have to say one more thing. I screwed up. On the audio with this episode, so it is not as high quality as hopefully you have come to expect from I've Been Thinking. I feel really strongly about quality audio files, and this one does not live up to my expectations, and it's my fault. I messed up some settings in recording, and I'm really disappointed with myself, but shout out to Nate, my podcast boss almost at Stoveleg Media, our network we're a part of. Nate really came in clutch and fixed it up for me as much as he could, and I'm so grateful for that and for him. So go listen to Nate's podcast, Mysteries of the Ohio Valley. It is an awesome podcast. It is like true crime, but a little bit different than kind of a lot of the true crime shows that we typically listen to. So it's an awesome show. Go listen to that when you're finished to show Nate some gratitude for the hard work that he did fixing my screw up. So, Dakota, I am sorry that I did that to our audio. Listeners, I am sorry that I did that to this audio, but I hope you enjoy the episode nonetheless, because it is absolutely fascinating. It is worth the listen. It's worth powering through. And yeah, with all that being said, here's Dakota.
Hi, my name is Dakota. She, her pronouns. Thanks for having me on the pod. I am a law student right now, and I also have a master's in human rights. But I'm here on the pod to talk about climate change and reproductive justice and how these two issues intersect. I wrote a piece for Women's Media Center last week about two recent Supreme Court decisions that are really connected, and we'll talk about why. So happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here, Dakota. And for the listeners who didn't just hear our background, one, I'm overcoming some sinus issues, so I sound a little bit like Kermit the Frog, I'm afraid. So FYI. But
Such
also,
a champ.
Thanks. Also, for a little background on the two of us, we went to Transy together, and I've had a handful of Transy grads on the podcast now, and I'm so excited. It's like such a great pool of people to pull from.
Because like that was such a great time in our lives for critical thinking, and that's what this pod's all about.
Absolutely. It was an incredible time for critical thinking. That is really, at least during our 4 years, that was what Transy was about, was encouraging critical thought and teaching us how to do that, which I'm eternally grateful for. And, of course, also very grateful for all the people that it gave me, all the interesting, diverse people and life paths and perspectives that I was able to be exposed to. And
totally.
Yeah. And grow from and grow with. So I'm really glad. And we reconnected recently, you and I did, and we told each other, oh, I wish we had been friends. Like I always admired you from afar.
Yeah, same. I think we were both on Instagram, and I told you that I had always had a crush on you or something, like a friend crush,
right.
You and Allison especially, me and Allison have more classes together, but I listened to actually her abortion pod episode today, in preparation for this, and in awe of that combo.
Right. Isn't
plug for episode 100.
Thank you so much. That was such an incredible conversation, and one I've actually wanted to have on here for a while. And obviously that overturn just spurred it, and I went to her and said, hey, I want to talk about this. And she said, well, good, because I wanted you to ask me that, because I do too.
Yeah. So important.
So important. So I'm glad that you're on here today, because the overturn is also, that plays into our conversation today. So tell us about, for the listener, we'll assume that they have not read your article for Women's Media. Give the listener a little bit of a summary, if you can.
Of course, yeah. So basically this op-ed that I wrote was sprung out of, yes, after Roe v. Wade was overturned with the Dobbs decision, but also a couple weeks after that, the Supreme Court ruled in another case called West Virginia v. EPA that was essentially about whether or not federal agencies have authority to place statewide or national, really, regulations on carbon emissions. And essentially, the Supreme Court, as per usual, expanded state power and held that that was not constitutional for the EPA to enact certain federal regulations to limit carbon emissions. So I was like, I'm actually pretty sure that these two things are very connected, right? The reproductive justice issues that will wreak havoc on so many humans after the Dobbs decision, and also the implications of West Virginia v. EPA. So I started researching, and I had some experience with this topic from my time working at Oxfam on the gender justice team. And I recognized that there was definitely basically some impacts coming from both sides, right? Which is, we use the word intersectionality, like in legal studies. And it's not just a legal thing, like across social sciences, people talk about Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectionality theory. But essentially, long story short, climate change and like the inevitable impacts of it that have already been unleashed create negative reproductive health outcomes. And conversely, the rise in need for sexual and reproductive health services is more difficult to meet when disasters that are climate driven, such as droughts, floods, hurricanes, mudslides, things like that, strike. It strains the government's and the humanitarian sector's ability to provide contraception, abortions, STI testing, all of it. So that's the gist.
Right. That's a great summary. And I wrote down when I read the article, and I reread it a little bit right before we started recording, I did like a little flow chart, right? And it's basically
love a flow chart.
Climate change to migration to exposure to disease and violence. And obviously, women and girls are the most vulnerable of all to exposure to disease and violence, pretty much always. So I think that was a great summary, and that little flow chart really helped me also kind of bring it all together. Just climate change leads to climate migration, and that leads to exposure of more people to disease and violence.
Yeah, totally. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just explain what climate migration is, because
Please.
I also had never heard this word until this summer. But basically, climate migration is exactly what it sounds like. It is when someone moves from one place to another because of the impacts of climate change. And, that can be from slow onset impacts like rising sea levels, or it can be fast, like, for example, when Hurricane Katrina hit and folks had to evacuate New Orleans. So that's what we're talking about, and how that impacts sexual and reproductive health care.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. And you also called it environmental displacement, which I thought was also a really good term for the situation. And while we're at it, I wanted to say intersectionality is basically at its core exactly what it sounds like, when two issues come together and intersect and affect one another. If you have a better definition for it than that right there,
not at all.
Jump in. But yeah, just when two issues come together, because that's not something that you often hear either in discussions, and it's certainly not something that I would have known the basic definition of if I hadn't been in political science and anthropology courses at Transy, right?
Absolutely,
so that was really important, especially in my anthropology minor. Definitely something that I learned a lot about. But so tell us, I guess, how did you come to this realization that these two things did intersect? Because we were talking a little bit off the air about how you, I guess, didn't really see it or didn't realize it until rather recently.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in law school. And as part of that, a lot of law students will do summer internships in between school years. And so this summer I was working with an organization called the Global Justice Center, which is an international organization that uses like international human rights law to fight for sexual and reproductive health rights, and also to eliminate sexual and gender-based violence. And when Dobbs happened, it was like abortion was the main thing that I was working on for the rest of the summer. And one thing that we did as part of our advocacy was submit a shadow report to a committee at the UN called the Committee on Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And typically, right, when you think about like racial discrimination, at least in like the U.S. context, maybe a lot of folks think about Black Lives Matter and like police violence, but it's also very structural, and it can impact healthcare, disability justice, education, socioeconomic status, all these things. And because we were writing, and by the way, I should add a disclaimer that I do not work for Global Justice Center anymore. Views are my own. I feel like I need to put a disclaimer on everything now that I'm in law school.
That's fair.
Yeah, so this is just me talking, but because the issue that we were, I guess, like, writing about was racial discrimination, right? Like, that's what this committee does. But Global Justice Center is a like sexual and reproductive rights organization, so they were talking all about abortion, and this report, by the way, is like completely open to the public. You can access it on Human Rights Watch's website. But long story short, I thought that it was fascinating that we were essentially claiming that abortion restrictions in the U.S. were a form of racial discrimination. And I was like, that's so fascinating to me, like that type of legal argument, right? Because intersectionality is like, everything is connected to everything.
Right.
And I was doing some research for that report, basically, and noticed some statistics on abortion deserts and contraceptive deserts, which is kind of like a food desert, like the same concept. Right. There's an extreme lack of access within a certain radius of where you live. And that started my thought process on what happens for folks who move from one place to another because of like hurricanes and rising sea levels and drought. These are issues that I worked on previously, working for a humanitarian organization. So that's what happened. And then I read some really great legal analysis on West Virginia v. EPA that the Washington Post, I think, did. And I was like, oh my God, these two decisions are happening at the exact same time. The Supreme Court is literally carving away at reproductive rights while they expand the energy sector's ability to just like run amok. And those two forces moving together kind of exacerbate one issue, which is how climate change like completely diminishes access to sexual and reproductive health care in a world where it's already being attacked.
Yeah, of course, you're exactly right. And that's a really interesting process to how you got to that point. But I think it's such an important realization, and something that needs to have coverage. It needs people to realize that these two things do intersect, that they come together in a really dangerous way, ultimately, and that it can be so my master's is one of my certificates is in disaster what's it called, disaster
Oh, I'm just medicated.
dang it, like disaster support, disaster recovery.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Whatever it is.
Yeah.
like readiness, that kind of thing. So I just have like all of these images in my head of people in the wake of hurricanes, of tornadoes, of earthquakes, floods, all of these different environmental disasters that we're seeing so many more of. The Eastern Kentucky floods, where that was a once in 1,000-year flood, and that's not the first one we've had in the past 20 years. Like, that's ridiculous. And people have absolutely in some cases absolutely no, and in some cases very limited access to healthcare, because what even if a place has significant healthcare infrastructure, you have damage to the building, you have the people being missing. Appalachian Regional Healthcare in one of the locations in Eastern Kentucky, and I think Breathitt County, but don't quote me on that, they had 20 people missing at one point. That was the hospital employees missing.
Yeah.
How can you can't have a hospital run missing that many people? I mean, that's one of the reasons for, COVID lockdowns, was to reduce the strain on hospitals. That is just like, we know that doesn't go well. Right. Yeah. So I think that the connection is obvious once you realize it, once you put it out there. It's obvious, and it's something that doesn't just affect women. It affects everybody, but it affects women, I think, especially.
Yeah, like anyone who can, like, give birth, but also, like, even just STIs, like, and access to contraception. Like, it goes in so many ways. And this is not just an issue that, like, oh, like, this is something small that's going to happen in the future. Like, this is just something to keep our eye on, like, we see it happening in countries like famine in Ethiopia, like hurricanes in the Caribbean. Like, it's not, no, you just gave an example of Eastern Kentucky, and, like, I'm here to tell you there are so many ways that a fully funded healthcare system that provides for sexual and reproductive healthcare, which is a human right, could impact a scenario like that. Because, like, to run with this example, like, if women in the community, anyone who has children in the community, have access to contraception and sexual and reproductive healthcare like abortion, then that eliminates the need for childcare in situations when crisis strikes, right? Like, and I'm not saying, like, people have unwanted children or anything, but, like, if you live in a community where you have access to things like abortion, contraception, STI testing, things like that, the whole community becomes more resilient because, like, you are generally a healthier community, and sexual and reproductive healthcare is healthcare. It's not just abortion. Like you and Allison were talking about in episode 100. It's very comprehensive, and it's not just the horror stories that media portrays. Yeah,
you're exactly right, and that was the perfect word. The community becomes more resilient. The community becomes healthier when it's not inundated with STIs, or when caretakers are able to prioritize their health and are able to go to work if they need to, because they don't have unwanted, unasked for children who they don't have the resources to care for. Like, all of these things play into each other, obviously. And exactly like you said, the access to reproductive health care in general, but reproductive health care especially, makes a more resilient community.
And even things like pre- and postnatal care, right? Like,
Yes.
And it's no surprise that the communities that are impacted most by climate change, like, are communities of color. Like, for example, I have like a section in the article, I think, that talks about how Black women are more highly exposed to pollution and heat waves, and this translates, like, there's so many studies that show this translates to preterm birth and low birth weights for women of color. And it's also influenced by like social determinants of health, such as like what person does for work, their stress levels, their income, education, things like that. But those things are also all defined by structural racism.
Right. And I mean, it's clear. By the way, I remember the name of my degree. It's emergency management,
yes.
or disaster resilience, whichever one you want to call it. But emergency management, yeah.
Nice.
So anyway, you saying the word resilient like triggered.
Yes.
The switch. Anyway,
love it.
I mean, we saw this exact kind of situation. If you want to talk about structures of racism and how that intersects with climate change, we saw that in New Orleans with Katrina and every other storm that's hit New Orleans since, but especially with Katrina, and the fact that people of color in lower class, impoverished communities in New Orleans are still trying to recover from the effects of Katrina in some places. And obviously it devastated. That was 20 years ago. And it was devastating. And it's still something that those people in those communities have to live with the physical, financial, emotional effects of. And it directly affects their health, especially.
Yeah. And we keep using Katrina as an example because it's like the quintessential climate migration in the U.S. example. And I mean, I didn't include any specific statistics about sexual and reproductive health outcomes at post-Katrina, but I am sure that levels of STIs rose, levels of like low birth weight babies rose, like cervical cancer rates probably increase because there's less access to facilities where you can go and have screenings. Like, they're destroyed by the hurricane. You don't have a car anymore. You don't have a house anymore. Like, why? Who cares about going to the clinic for your like annual PAP when you need to feed your children?
Or and so these are like go to the clinic for your annual PAP when you don't have the money to feed even your children.
Exactly, because you don't have a job anymore because everything is destroyed. Right. And this is not just like, I really want the audience to know that this is not some obscure emergent issue. Like, this is already happening. I just want to highlight some statistics that I included from the article because they are bonkers. Like, so since 2008, 21.5 million people per year have moved from one place to another because of extreme weather. And in the U.S. alone, in 2020, aka 2 years ago, 1.7 million times is how many people were displaced because of natural disasters and extreme weather. 1.7 million times. And that's just the U.S. And let's see, in 2050, the World Bank estimates that 30 million people will head to the U.S. border that year because of extreme weather events. 30 million people. This is the World Bank. This is not like a research study that I just like a dinky, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
These statistics are crazy. And like, I feel like there are a few scientists, a few activists and organizations, like especially feminist youth-led organizations that are like ringing the bell, like on the Titanic, like there's an iceberg. And like, you know, like it's no secret that we lack political will in the United States to do any meaningful action on climate change. I mean, the Paris Accords were such a flop. Anyways, but like...
Oh, you're exactly right.
Like, it just... Yeah, it feels extremely existential and urgent. But I guess everything does. But yeah, this issue, I think, is very important. It's also emblematic of so many issues, right? Because so many issues are exacerbated by climate change.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I love that you said that. Like, it feels so urgent. Everything does feel so urgent, like you said, especially today when we're hyper exposed to everything that's going on in the world. And our little monkey brains just aren't meant to handle all of that. But it literally is urgent. Climate change is urgent. That's something that our grandparents don't get to see the effects of, but we do.
Yeah.
We are literally seeing the effects of it right now. And if we have children, which for I know a handful of people who don't want children because of climate change. And, you know, it's scary because it is something that we have to directly deal with. And as a woman who, you know, who knows, I could be displaced by climate change, especially with, I live on the Florida Panhandle. Who knows? You know?
Yeah.
The Gulf could surge, the bayou could rise, like, who knows? And a hurricane could wipe the entire coastline out. And then I'd have to go back to eastern Kentucky, where I'm from, where the hills won't save you from a flood. Where living on the side of a mountain doesn't help. Like,
that's true.
There's nowhere that you can win.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, yes, these issues disproportionately impact people of color, obviously, and LGBTQ people and disabled folks and, you know, like all sorts of marginalized people more than others. But no one is safe from climate change. Like, it's the ultimate destructive force. And honestly, I think that we need to open our minds a little bit in terms of how we think about impacts, right? Because even like the story of climate change, like the popular narrative, right, is like that's something that happens far away. That countries that are closer to the equator are experiencing extreme weather. Like, okay, Europe had some hot summers. It's just the summer, you know, and but the reality is it impacts everyone in ways that we are not yet noticing. And I mean, yeah, like I can just rip off statistics all day, but like, and the reality too with sexual and reproductive rights is that like, I think that you guys spoke about this in the abortion episode too, but like making abortion illegal does not eliminate abortion. And so when you're moving from one place to another because there was just a tornado or a heat wave that ruined all your crops and now your family has to move and you find out that you're pregnant. If there's not a clinic within, you know, an accessible distance, this results in higher rates of unsafe abortions. You know, like we've all heard horror stories from like the 60s in the US, but this happens globally, of course. And people die from unsafe abortions every single year, like lots of people, not just a couple. So this is like, yes, it's a healthcare issue. It's also a climate justice issue.
Absolutely. I mean, we've all seen Dirty Dancing. Like, unsafe abortions are no bueno. Quote of the day.
Love it.
That's gonna change the Supreme Court's mind. No, unsafe abortions are not the way to go. And I think that but they become, of course, a necessity. Or a last resort kind of necessity in that sense. And, you know, obviously we would rather have safe abortions. Or we'd rather have, ideally, in a perfect world, no need for abortions, right? But if that's your right to choose, and in that case, you need the ability to have a safe one. Anyway, I think that was a perfect example that you gave. You know, drought ruins your crops. That is even less, I guess, dramatic than a hurricane, than severe flooding, something like that. Droughts happen all the time. Wildfires that are exacerbated by climate change. Those things happen all the time, and they're normal in some places, but obviously they're made worse by climate change. And people just say, oh, well, you know, winter's colder this year, or winter's warmer this year. I kind of enjoy it. But they don't realize that that is literally climate change and the effects it's going to have in the long run.
In the long run and in the short run. Like, and in the short sometimes, run. For example, like air pollution, or let's use the example of drought. Like, air pollution can cause severe respiratory issues. I put an example in the article about a Bangladeshi migrant who became the first environmentally displaced person in France. But also things like heat waves, malnourishment. You know, if you're a subsistence farmer and drought or heat waves ruin your crops and you can't feed your family and you become malnourished, these things have an automatic impact. And a slow impact. So it really, it's slow and fast. But of course, a lot of times folks who have more exposure to the impacts of the climate crisis, more exposure to heat waves, for example, or maybe they live close to chemical plants. I'm from a community in Western Kentucky that's very close to chemical plants. And, you know, when you're breathing these things all day, you know, you have increased rates of, over time, of cancer or whatever. These are traditionally families from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, working in factories, working out in the sun, working on a farm. Like, the guy in Wall Street in, like, a suit and $2,000 shoes is not gonna have his asthma flare up from chemicals in the air.
Furthermore, the guy on Wall Street isn't going to be exposed to chemicals in the air because he doesn't have to live close to it, because that's the only place he can afford housing.
Yeah, exactly. And these things all lead to birth complications, you know, and like higher rates of infant and maternal mortality. That means like more babies and parents dying during childbirth.
Yep.
Like, yeah.
It all comes together, like I said, so obviously once you realize that intersection is there. You can see it at almost every turn.
Yeah.
But your article, and I want the listener to go seek this article out, go find it. It will be in the show notes in the blog post for today's episode, because it is really wonderfully written, and Dakota does have some awesome statistics and examples and all of that in the article. It's really well done, and I'm really glad that you wanted to talk about it today, because I do think that intersection is really important. It's really interesting, and it's really important.
Yeah. And my hope, honestly, like, if like someone who reads this or like hears this conversation gets anything out of it, I hope that the takeaway is everything is not as simple as it seems, and every issue is connected to every other issue. And this is intersectionality. This is just one example of how it plays out and how it has devastating impacts on people's lives. And what that means for folks like who care about changing the world is that when you become a climate advocate, or you're advocating for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence or LGBTQ rights or anything, you think also about those intersectional issues like climate justice, disability justice, gender justice, economic justice. It's all connected.
It is all connected. And I think this is an observation of my own, and I'd be intrigued to know what you think about this. But I think that when you come, even, I guess, even when you're adjacent to a minority group or a group that is oppressed in some way, or a group that takes the brunt of these kinds of issues, that it all becomes so much more obvious, the connectedness.
Oh, totally. Yeah. No. Yeah, and I think also being willing to have listening ears, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, full disclosure, I am a cis straight white female, so I have a lot of privilege just by the virtue of my identity. But I can listen to someone's experience and say, okay, I understand this, and I understand how it is touched by, and it touches so many different aspects of your life.
Mm-hmm.
So let's bulldoze the platform off together so that you can stand on high and demand what you deserve.
Exactly. And I love that about you. That's definitely one of the things I love about you. And that's also, one of the missions of I've Been Thinking is to raise up everybody so that different perspectives can be heard, and to allow people to listen to new perspectives or different perspectives or life experiences or whatever it is in a safe space, so that they can be challenged but not like confronted. Right? What did you say?
I said attacked.
Attacked, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, so I love this, and I hope that for the listener that this has been educational on these ideas of intersectionality and of how women's rights are definitely affected by climate change and are right now, and certainly will continue to be in the future, especially as our Supreme Court continues to say, not my
you
problem.
Don't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't matter, you're not my problem. Yeah.
Oh my god. Yeah. Before we go, can I give some recommendations to the listeners? Okay, yes, I came prepared.
I love it.
Okay, so I think, like, what I want the audience to know is that if you care about this issue, there are already so many, like, badass, incredible feminist organizations that are doing everything they can to transform the world to be more just, and that includes making sexual and reproductive health care more accessible and getting climate action that's also, like, feminist. So I guess what I would say is donate. Like, I know that we're all, like, young and broke. At least me and I mean, I am. I won't speak for you, Elena.
I
am. Okay. I'm like,
I'm
like living off student loans right now. But the thing is, like, youth-led feminist organizations are excellent models for intersectional work on disability justice, reproductive justice, climate justice, and money that goes to them, like, your dollar is going to go 100 miles further than it would if it went to, I mean, I don't want to, like, make any of these huge, amazing organizations sound bad. They're great organizations, but they're well-funded. I'm talking about places like Planned Parenthood, the ACLU. They're all amazing organizations. They also have big donors. So, yeah. I would recommend looking at Frida, for example. It's a youth-led feminist organization, and they distribute money to youth-led feminist organizations globally. And they believe in the power of youth to lead and transform our communities, and that includes climate justice, reproductive justice.
Loves it.
Loves it. Also, the National Network for Abortion Funds. I'm sure it's been said a bajillion times since Dobbs, but this money that you donate to them goes directly to small abortion clinics in places where, you know, the far reaches of the country where it is hard to get an abortion. If you need that, if you medically desperately are in need, and even if you just want an abortion, like, you may have to drive hundreds of miles. These are the organizations that are providing those abortions and, like, literally saving lives every single day. Yeah. And then finally, I think that we all just need to talk more about this issue and all intersectional issues. I also think it's really important in discussions like these to ground the conversation in sort of like recognition of Indigenous rights and Indigenous perspectives on change, because capitalism is like fundamentally at odds with climate justice, right? Mm-hmm. It is predicated on limitless growth and profit and expansion, and it is killing our planet. But, you know, we're all right now on native land. Everyone listening to this podcast in the U.S. is on native land. And Indigenous communities are doing the most to preserve and protect our planet and just subvert capitalist tenets like land ownership and colonialism and limitless expansion.
Yeah, that is an awesome call out. Thank you for all of those resources.
Of course. I'll send them over so you can have them in the show notes too.
Perfect. Thank you so much. You beat me to it. I didn't even have to ask.
Thank you. You're the best.
Absolutely. So if the follower or if the listener wants to follow you on social media, do you want to put your socials out there?
Yeah, I'll. My Twitter is like my sort of professional-ish space on social, so you can follow me at Miss Dakota P. That's MSDAKOTAP on Twitter.
Perfect. And that will be available in the show notes too. Dakota, thank you so much. I am beyond grateful for you giving me some of your time this evening to talk through this. It was a really, really interesting educational conversation, like I said, and I hope that this gives something to the listener, gives something new to think about, to learn about, and to go out into the world and help make the world a better place around this issue.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
I love the pod.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad. We'll have you back.
Yay! Okay.